Hi, I'm Femi OK, and you're in the stream. Today, respectful representation. Why are disability clichés so destructive for the community? We'll take a look at a viral Twitter thread that explores the impact that some common tropes have on people with disabilities. And this is an important conversation. We want to hear from you. You can chat me on YouTube or tweet me at AJStream.
Hi, my name's Malcolm Schmitz, and I'm autistic. Two bad media tropes that affect me. 1. Autistic people are jerkwads whose bad behavior is justified because they're brilliant. This trope paints autistic people as entitled, which makes it hard for us to get accommodations. 2. Autistic people are always white, male, and young, usually children. This trope makes it harder for autistic people of color, women, and adults to get diagnosed. It also makes it difficult for trans autistic people like me to get care. Autistic people need respect. The way we're portrayed in the media denies us that basic need.
Disabled people are lazy and just need to get off their self-indulgent butts and do some hard work. Or anything is better than being disabled. Or your disability inspires me. Offensive? Absolutely. And only just some of the most common ways that disability is used in media, pop culture, literature, politics, and so much more. This is Cindy Baldwin. Hello, Cindy. She is an author who wrote that thread you just saw that has been tweeted and liked several thousand times. Now, if you haven't read it yet, you can bookmark it, share it, engage with your community on it. Cindy's latest book is Where the Watermelons Grow. Also with us on the programme, MARYANGEL GARCIA-RAMOS, a disability and diversity activist in Monterrey, Mexico, and founder of the Mexican Woman with Disabilities movement. Happy to have you back, MARYANGEL. And another friend of the stream, Lawrence Carter-Long, is the Director of Communications at the Disability Rights Education and Defence Fund. Thank you all for being with us. We are so ready to start the conversation. Cindy, I am looking at this thread. I have read it several times. Just take us back, set the scene. Where were you? What was your mood when you sat down to write a thread with 11 tropes in it? Details in here.
So this was something that I had actually been thinking about doing for a couple of weeks. I am, as you mentioned, I'm an author. I write books for children, and so I end up reading a lot of books for children too. And fairly regularly, I'll see books that have really hurtful portrayals of people with disabilities. And this is something that I had been thinking about for a couple weeks. And I had kind of had this idea that a lot of the problem with media representations of disabilities is the fact that most people, that we're all raised in such an ableist society that we don't actually recognize what good and bad disability representation is. And so I kind of had this idea that maybe if I broke down some of the common tropes and explained why they were hurtful, then it might help. And I didn't expect it to get much traction. I was honestly really just hoping that like a couple of librarians in the kidlit world would read it or something like that and kind of help to spread that message.
Right. So it got really big. How big did it get? Let's just humble brag here. How big did it get?
I think last time I checked, it was up to like 10.6 thousand likes or something and about 5,000 retweets.
I'm just looking here, Cindy, at one point here you say, update, I'm having to mute this thread for now. Thank you, everyone who has read and shared and discussed these words. I so appreciate it. You're like, okay, bye, because so much was happening. Lawrence, what was happening here that this particular thread at this particular moment really took off?
It really shows that Cindy hit a nerve, right? The problem with these tropes is that they're reinforced over and over again. And people, when they hear them over and over again, they're not questioned. They begin to believe them. I think creatively, the worst part about them is that they're lazy, right? They don't give us any new ground. They don't give us any new insight. So what Cindy did, which is very great, is she popped the bubble so that people could expand their brains and maybe have a different view.
I love, MARYANGEL, that Cindy actually numbered these. So let's go to number 4, because number 4 is something that you find really upsetting. Inspirational porn. Let's dig into that. Why did you pick that one out of the 11 that Cindy gave us?
I think that one, first of all, I think this thread was amazing because it also had Cindy's perspective on it, which I think made it like very real and like coming from a very like honest place. And I think this one particularly, the inspiration porn, bothers me a lot because especially in the impact that it has in everything from politics to our lives to everything. because we're not seen as subjects of rights.
Yeah.
And we're not given those rights, but only when we become inspirational to others, that's when we, become alive. And also, I think that when it comes to inspiration porn, it sets like this narratives about that, very ableist narrative about that our disabled lives exist to inspire you as not disabled. So I think that one was a very powerful one.
And Cindy describes it in this way: disabled person inspires everyone around them by dint of their very presence, thus changing lives. Cindy, you work a lot with kids, and you are saying that these stereotypes are harmful for children. Can you explain why?
Oh, hugely harmful for children. I have, like I mentioned, I will periodically read a book that I check out from the library or gets sent to me that has a harmful portrayal of disability. And often it's hard for me to read. Sometimes it's like almost physically hard for me to read because it's so invalidating of my existence and my realities. And like, I'm an adult, I have my own kids. I have a fairly robust sense of self-concept. But when a kid is reading things like that, they don't have any of that framework built up inside themselves. And a disabled kid is usually still coming to understand what their disability means and how it's different from other people's lives. And I am chronically ill, and so health and illness has always been a big part of my life. But when I was a teenager, I became very, very ill, and I was almost completely bedbound for a year, and kind of never the same after that. And I struggled so much with these kind of disability tropes that we see in representation in media, because I felt like there were all these things I had to do to be a good and valuable disabled person. And my life wasn't actually worth anything if I wasn't kind of living up to that media narrative of what a good disabled person looks like. And so that's something that's always on my mind, that as a kids author, I feel like you have a sacred responsibility, because people are reading this when they're still forming their understanding of themselves and the world and how they deserve to be treated and how they deserve to live their lives. So that's something that's always really on my mind.
And that was one of the points you picked up, that anything is better than being disabled. Let me share this with you, Lawrence. This is Michelle. Michelle writes in and tweets us often at the stream. Often the only exposure people have to disabled people is via what they see in the media. Now imagine the majority of stories about disabled people are written by able-bodied people who are writing it from an ableist, discriminatory perspective. It sounds outrageous, Lawrence, but that happens all the time in movies.
It happens all the time. We don't accept that anymore with gender. We don't accept that anymore with ethnicity. The thing with disability is we've always had those stories told by other people, right? It's been the doctors, it's been the social workers, it's been the preachers, the teachers, and the parents. I think what's unique about what's happening right now is we're 30 years past the time when the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed, and disabled people are speaking for themselves, right? They're tweeting for themselves, and everybody else can read that. So they're no longer saying that disability is a dirty word, right? That it's got 8 letters, right? 9 letters. It's not a 4-letter word. It's not a curse word. So we can say it, right? That it's not something that happens by incident or accident, but it's something that we're a part of that's bigger than any one individual. That when we say that we're disabled, we're part of a community. We're part of 61 million people in the United States, billions of people around the world. That's 26% of the population here in the U.S. So it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's nothing to run away from. Life is too short, too precious to pick up somebody else's shame, and disabled people aren't doing that anymore. And we're not having it, which is why tweets like these, threads like these are popular.
Maryanghel, go ahead. I should also say that Michelle is in a wheelchair, and there's something that Cindy absolutely said, and I love this on her tweet. She said, share your other tropes with me, share your other stereotypes with me. I want to hear from you. And then in parentheses, disabled people only for this, please. So she didn't want people who didn't have disabilities to have an opinion in this particular topic. Maryanghel, go ahead.
And I think what Lawrence was saying is, I think this transcends countries and languages, because in Spanish and in Mexico, we have the same, we have the same issue. In our side, for example, if we see telenovelas, which are like the biggest pop culture thing that you see, every person with a disability that it's portrayed on them, it's like, the poor person who can't be happy if they're not cured. And it was a part of the disability, one of the disability tropes that was on the thread, right? Also, it was like in the end, the bad guy, dies. The bad guy becomes blind, for example, right? And it's kind of like this curse. So this disability negative narratives has been internalized even by us, the person with the disabilities. And obviously, it's a total ableist storytelling without having a disability, a storytelling way of an ableist storytelling.
Yeah.
And it's been like hard on that side, and not only in the United States, but I see it all around the world as well.
I know you talk about.
That's true.
Yeah. Lawrence, hold tight for 1 second.
I was just going to say, unlike other minorities, if you will, most people aren't born into disability community, right? You can be born into an ethnicity, you can be born into a religion, you can be born into a political a party or affiliation, but most people don't know other disabled folks from the time they're born, and they're not encouraged to know other disabled folks. So all of those negative memes, all of those negative attitudes, all of those negative things that most non-disabled people never challenge get put upon that disabled kid. So I think it's really important that as we're growing up, as we're talking, that we begin to stretch that and switch that. What I think is really incredible about this is if somebody is telling you that you're not defined by your disability, or you shouldn't be defined by your disability, what that tells you is that they're using an old definition. If you go to the disabled people that I work with here at DREDF, they're going to tell you, if you ask what the word means to them, they're going to say things like culture, community, constituency, identity, right? It has nothing to do with diagnosis. And so if you're solely thinking of disability as diagnosis, you're signaling to everybody else, particularly the disability community, that you're stuck in the past. We need to move beyond that.
Lawrence, I'm going to bring up Cindy's trope number 7. Cindy, let me just share this with people because I feel this is where you've brought a debate out into the open. There's kind of a pretty fierce debate. Lawrence put his opinion out there. Trope number 7 from you, don't let your disability define you. I get where this comes from. Non-disabled people are trying real hard to make sure disabled people are often seen as nuanced people here, and that's admirable, but it's also failing to grasp an important fact. Many disabled people are defined by our disabilities. Cindy.
Yeah, so this is something that has been kind of a long journey for me because my illness was a part of me since I was born. I have grown up with adults and authority figures around me saying, "Oh, you aren't defined by this. This is just something that's, a small part of your life. It doesn't have to control you." And I reached a certain point as a teenager where I was like, that's completely not true. This does define my life. There's no action that I do in my life that is not filtered through the lens of my disability, because everything that I do, I have to make sure I'm going to have enough energy. I have to make sure that I'm not going to have physical joint issues or muscle issues that are going to physically prevent me from doing that. I mean, on and on and on. And so it's something that I grew to be frustrated about. But I also agree with what Lawrence is saying, because what I always say is that my disability does define me, but that's okay. It's not necessarily a bad thing. And I think usually it's only abled people who see that idea of a disability defining somebody who immediately jump to that being a bad or a negative thing. Because there's a lot of things that define me. I mean, I'm lactose intolerant, and so that defines whether or not I can drink milk. But that's not something that I'm like, oh my gosh, this is such a bad thing, go ahead.
I want to jump in what you just said, because I think it's so powerful that you as a woman with, a disability has the voice to actually say, I am not defined by my disability. I am defined by my disability, because if not, then you would be erasing these efforts that go day to day that you don't see. But at the same time, I think I've thought about this trope a lot, and I also think that if there are people who say the disability doesn't define them, I think it could also, it could have a different, also, I think, maybe positive vision about it, about, there are other things that I would consider defining. But as long as none of them are based on the fact that disability is this bad thing, that we're this broken, negative, not happy beings, then I think it's great that we can have our own versions of if it defines me or not. but not based on the, negative old narrative about it.
Okay, guess.
Yeah,
And I think we've got to ask ourselves.
Let me just share this with you.
We've got to ask ourselves, what's the assumption? What's the underlying assumption? The underlying assumption, when anybody says your disability doesn't define you, is that disability is bad. I'm going to push back against that, right?
All right, so guess.
The disability.
Guess and Lawrence, just give me a little sliver of time because I want to share with you a thought from Valerie Calfin. She is a film and TV critic, and she puts a really interesting point into our conversation. Here it is.
I think it's vital to have creators and storytellers who have disabilities or who know people with disabilities well, either as family members or as friends, involved in the portrayals of characters with disabilities. Otherwise, you're only viewing one particular segment of their perspective, and you're doing a disservice to this audience. My 10-year-old son has spina bifida, and I can tell you there's a huge difference between being born with a disability and developing one later in life. And it's important to show we all have things that make us different and make us special.
While I have the floor, let me just show you what's happening here on YouTube. Rahel says that one example of inclusion is representation. It's very important for people to see examples of people with disabilities in films and media, not portrayed in harmful ways. Cindy, this is something that you mentioned much earlier, particularly for kids and then in films. And what happens to people with disabilities?
Oh, this is something
share that with us.
My husband gets to hear my rants about this whenever we're watching TV.
Yeah.
Especially in certain types of genres, there is a huge prevalence for disability in characters to be sort of a symbol of either weakness or like ineffectiveness or evil. And you see it a lot in certain kids media. We watched on Netflix last year the series of Unfortunate Events, which was really fun. But one of the things that got me every single time is that one of the adults in the story is the ineffective guardian who's never able to save his charges from the evil character. And his main characterization is that he has a chronic cough. And it's the cough is used as a shorthand to show that he's weak and ineffective as a guardian. And it just always got me because, like, I have cystic fibrosis. I cough all the time. And you see that a lot. You see another thing that drives me nuts is that a lot of times a character will have asthma and they'll have an inhaler, but the inhaler is actually a symbol of their lack of confidence. And then when they get confident at the end, they throw away the inhaler. And I'm like, that's not how inhalers work. That's not how asthma works. It doesn't matter how much inner confidence you have. You're having bronchial spasms.
We need to find that asthma cure. We'll all be rich. I'll split it 3 ways with you. All right, Lawrence, there's one of the jobs that you have, and there's a comment here from Amanda Rawson here, which I love. She said, just a reminder, guys, this thread is super helpful, but the only way to really get a better idea of if your disabled character is hurtful or a stereotype is to pay or trade for a sensitivity read. You are kind of that. You are a living embodiment of that sensitivity read, Lawrence. For instance, you work for Turner Classic Movies, and you were looking for representation of good disability, good portrayals of disability in movies.
We looked at good, bad, and wackadoodle. You know, what we did was we looked at 237 movies from the silent era up through the time the ADA was passed in 1990. And we looked at
American
every
Disabilities
decade.
Act.
What were those trends? What were those tropes that were shown during those times? And how they echoed and how they changed throughout those times. And all of these things that Cindy shows in her thread kept coming up over and over again. One of the things you never saw within those 7-8 decades of disability in film was disability in community. What happens when disabled people come together, when they decide enough is enough and we're not going to take it anymore? Thankfully, I was just at the Sundance Film Festival a couple of weeks ago, saw the world premiere of a movie called Crip Camp by Nicole Newnham and Jim LeBrecht that's going to drop on Netflix that shows these people went to a summer camp. They came out of the summer camp. They realized I am not alone in this. And people went to change the literal world. They went and they fought for disability civil rights, and laws came out of that. Changes in attitudes came out of that. People are going to be able to see maybe for the first time what happens when disability community comes together. That is a great leap forward.
Let's talk politics, because disability in politics is becoming more and more of a bigger topic. Not even if politicians may not be paying attention, but certainly people with disabilities are making them pay attention. I'm just looking here at some of the hashtags that are pretty busy right now. Disability inclusion, Disability Counts 2020 is another big one, because there's a census in the United States, and if you're not counted, then there will not be policy that's built around you. There will not be facilities and services that you need. There will not be healthcare services that are available. And you need to be counted. And counting people with disabilities is very important.
That's right. There may not be a specific question about disability on the 2020 census, but all of those things that disabled people rely on to live independent lives, things like Medicare or health care coverage, things like special education, things like SNAP benefits or food stamps, because people with disabilities are more likely to live in low poverty or low income or poverty than our non-disabled peers.
Lawrence, have you come across Donna Meltzer? She's the CEO of the National Association of Councils on Developmental Disabilities. She was talking about the census and disabilities. She spoke to us here at the stream. Here's what she told us.
Taking part in the census means that you are being counted. This is critically important, particularly for people with developmental disabilities. For too long, stigma, lack of information about being the importance of the census and being counted kept people away from being counted. But it's critically important. If we want the right amount of funding to be available, we have to stand up and be counted. Don't let stigma or lack of information stand in your way.
Go ahead, Lawrence.
Yeah, life is too short for somebody else's shame. It's really important for disabled people, which is what we're seeing now. We've got disabilitycounts2020.org. You can go directly to that website. You've got 9 videos that are in English, Spanish, and American Sign Language. They can give you all the details that you need about why disabled people need to be counted in the census. And we're very excited about this, and we're seeing people across the state of California and indeed the country who are not going to not be counted anymore, and they're going to put themselves front and center, which is, again, another great leap forward.
You are lobbying like a genius. MARYANGEL, go for it. What did you want to add?
Yeah, I think that on the census, for example, in Mexico, we have the same issue. We need to be counted, and this year, for the first time, disability is going to be part of the questions that's going to be on the short and long questionnaire on the census, because you know, if we're invisible, then there is no way that we can be part of the creation of public policy and social development of our needs and what we want. And also think that it comes together with all these disability narratives and tropes, because in Mexico, for example, as an example, we have the only social policy that we have today, like a federal social policy with our new president, has been totally assistentialist. Nothing that has to do particularly with our health. Or, you know, if we talk about women with disabilities, about violence, there is nothing about that, nothing about our education, nothing about, you know, this development. So I think it's important to be counted, but it's also important to keep on pushing these tropes, these narratives, because sometimes these are the only, you know, things that people who don't have any idea about disability and have the power of making decisions know, and then they make the decisions for us.
Let me just show you one more thought here from YouTube, and then I'm going to wrap up with Cindy. This comment from StigmaFan09, and she talks about invisible disabilities, and she said that they can't be seen. I'm treated like I don't have a disability because it can't be seen, and I'm abusing the system, so people are suspicious of her saying that she has disability or a disability. She says, I have epilepsy, but you cannot see it. Cindy, how do you want us to wrap up this conversation?
Oh, yeah, I think that's a wonderful point. I have a mostly invisible disability at all.
That's why I thought I'd go to you, because people will be watching you thinking, she looks fantastic.
and I get
and
that
you
all
do.
the time.
Regardless,
you know, I look fine. Like so I will often run into that, or people being like,
Cindy, we've got one more sentence to wrap up this show. What's your final thought you want to leave people with? What is it? Go for it.
I would really love to see more space made for disabled people to tell our own stories, because I think that is the thread that ties all of these issues together.
Okay, Cindy, we appreciate you. MARYANGEL, thank you so much. Lawrence, as always, thank you. Our conversation continues online. You'll find me at AJ Stream on Twitter. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you next time.